My friends and I always joked about the unfinished house on the edge of town. Locals nicknamed it the ghost house because construction had mysteriously halted years ago, leaving it a vacant, eerie shell of a home. It stood on a sketchy street lined with overgrown lawns and derelict properties, houses that looked abandoned, even though a few cars occasionally sat in their driveways. The ghost house was a local curiosity, its dark, empty windows daring anyone to look closer. Late one night, my friends Jenny, Luca, Kylie, and I were driving aimlessly around town. Boredom mixed with adrenaline after a round of fast food, and Luca had a bright idea. "Why don't we check out the ghost house?" he suggested, a sly grin on his face. The girls exchanged glances before agreeing, and of course I couldn't back down either. So, just past midnight, we parked a few houses down from the ominous property. The only streetlight nearby barely illuminated the cracked pavement and the ghost house's looming frame. Everything about the place seemed wrong, silent, dark, and utterly unwelcoming. But that's what made it irresistible. We crept up to the house, the air around us unnervingly still. The front yard was a jungle of weeds and discarded junk, a rusted tricycle, empty soda bottles, a faded garden gnome missing its head. The house itself loomed like a monument to neglect, its wooden beams weathered and splintered, the half-installed roof sagging under its own weight. The door, slightly ajar, creaked as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and damp wood. Our flashlights illuminated bare walls, exposed wiring, and a floor scattered with debris. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps and the occasional creak of the house settling. "This place is disgusting," Kylie muttered, brushing cobwebs from her jacket. "Perfect for ghost hunting," Luca quipped, flashing his phone camera around. As we ventured deeper, the unease settled into my chest like a weight. Something about the house felt wrong. It wasn't just the darkness or the eerie quiet. It was an unshakable sensation, like we were intruding somewhere we didn't belong. Jenny paused in the hallway, her flashlight trained on a door at the end. "What's in there?" she asked. "Only one way to find out," Luca replied, already heading toward it. The door led to a staircase spiraling down into the basement. A cold draft wafted up, carrying with it a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. "Maybe we shouldn't go down there," I said, the words tasting like fear. "Come on, don't chicken out," Luca said, descending the steps without hesitation. One by one, we followed. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the smell grew stronger, more pungent. Our flashlights revealed a cavernous space filled with scattered tools, wooden planks, and something else, a series of crude symbols etched into the concrete walls. "What the hell is this?" Jenny whispered, running her fingers over one of the markings. "It's probably just graffiti," Luca said, though his voice wavered. Kylie crouched by an old, rusted toolbox in the corner. "Guys, there's something in here." She pried it open, revealing a collection of dusty Polaroids. She held one up to the light and my stomach dropped. The photo showed 4 people standing in the very same basement. Their faces were pale, their expressions frozen in terror. Behind them, a shadowy figure loomed, its features indistinct but undeniably menacing. "Is this some kind of joke?" Jenny asked, her voice shaking. "No way," Luca said. "Who would go to this much effort?" Before we could process it further, a loud bang echoed from upstairs. We froze, our breath caught in our throats. "What was that?" Kylie whispered, clutching my arm. "Probably just the wind," Luca said, though his attempt at reassurance sounded hollow. Another bang, louder this time, reverberated through the house. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and heading toward the basement door. We turned off our flashlights, plunging ourselves into darkness. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain whoever or whatever was upstairs could hear it. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. The silence that followed was suffocating, stretching out until it felt like hours. Then the first step creaked. "Run," I whispered, barely audible, but no one moved. The next step groaned, then the next. Something was coming down the stairs, slow and deliberate. I could feel the presence, oppressive and suffocating, pressing against my chest. Jenny screamed first, her flashlight flickering on as she bolted for the stairs. The rest of us followed, our panic overriding any sense of reason. We pushed past each other, tripping and stumbling as we scrambled out of the house. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap. We didn't stop running until we reached the car, piling in and locking the doors. "What the hell was that?" Kylie gasped, tears streaming down her face. No one answered. We sat in stunned silence. The image of that shadowy figure burned into our minds. As Luca started the car, I glanced back at the house. Front door was closed now, as if we had never been there, but in one of the dark windows I could swear I saw a face watching us, its expression unreadable. We never spoke about that night again. But sometimes when I drive past the ghost house, I feel its gaze lingering, a silent reminder of whatever we disturbed inside. It was late at night and my friends and I were bored. We wanted to do something different instead of just playing video games and drinking like we always did. One of my friends suddenly had a wild idea. "Why don't we check out the haunted bridge?" I was curious because I had never heard of it before. "Why should we go there? It's almost midnight," I said. Honestly, I wanted to go but was also scared. They kept saying it would be fun and convinced me to come along. I hesitated but finally agreed. It was about an hour's drive, but I had the next day off, so I thought, why not? We hopped in the car and started driving. On the way, we stopped for gas and snacks. While my friends were busy, I noticed an old lady standing near the gas station. She was staring at me, really staring like she could see right through me. She was wearing strange, almost witch-like clothes, and something about her felt off. I turned to one of my friends and asked, "Hey, did you see that?" He shrugged and said, "Yeah, just some homeless lady. What's the big deal?" "She was staring at me really hard," I replied. He joked, "Maybe she liked you. You should have asked for her number." We laughed it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Eventually, we got back on the road, and one of my friends started telling us the story of the haunted bridge. He explained that years ago, a woman had sacrificed her baby on that bridge because the child came from an incestuous relationship. She threw the baby into the water below. Ever since, people who visit the bridge claim to hear a baby crying and the screams of a woman in agony. I won't lie, I was already scared just hearing the story. About 10 miles away from the bridge, something unbelievable happened. Right there on the road was the old lady from the gas station. "Yo, did you see that?" I shouted. "Holy shit, is that the same old lady?" Another friend asked. "Do we stop?" Someone said nervously. "Hell no," the driver answered and floored it. We sped past her, but she yelled at us to stop. It was terrifying. How did she get here so fast? Why was she out on the road at this hour? My mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out. This wasn't a normal person. I begged my friends to turn back and go home. "It's not worth it," I said. "Don't be such a wimp," one of them teased. "Are you scared of an old lady? Live a little." I felt trapped. They wouldn't let me back out, so we kept going. We finally arrived at the bridge. It was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by empty fields. There was nothing else around except for an old abandoned house nearby that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. My friend explained how to summon the ghost. "You have to turn off the car, put the keys on the roof, and call her name, Maria." "No way I'm doing that," I said. "Fine," he replied, "but we all have to get out of the car." Somehow they convinced me to go along with it. It was pitch black, and the silence was suffocating. As we stood there, a light flickered inside the abandoned house. We saw a shadow move inside, and suddenly, an ear-piercing scream broke the silence. It was full of pain and suffering. Then we heard a deep, guttural voice shout, "Leave now!" We ran to the car as fast as we could. My heart was pounding. We jumped in and tried to start the car, but it wouldn't start. The screams grew louder, and then we heard a baby crying. "Start the car!" I yelled. "I'm trying," my friend shouted back, panicked. Finally, the car started, but then we saw her. The old lady from the gas station was standing right in front of the car, illuminated by the headlights. My friend froze, and I screamed, "Go, floor it!" But the car wouldn't move. The old lady walked toward us, laughing like a maniac. She began chanting something in a language I didn't understand, Latin maybe. I was shaking with fear. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she turned and walked away, still laughing. The car finally moved, and we sped away, not saying a word. The entire drive home was dead silent. We were all too scared to speak. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. It felt like something heavy was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The next day, my friends and I met up to talk about what happened. None of us had slept well. The air had felt heavy for all of us. One friend, the one who had recorded everything on his phone, played back the audio. Strangely, the video didn't show the old lady, but we could hear her voice. We couldn't figure out what she was saying, though. We decided to take the recording to someone who might understand it. We found a shop nearby called Arcane Rituals. It was filled with crystals, strange symbols, and other mystical stuff. A woman came out to greet us, but the moment she saw me, her face went pale. She screamed, "No! He has to leave now!" I stepped outside while my friends stayed to talk to her. When they asked what she saw, she said, "I see darkness. I see tortured souls, pain, and suffering surrounding him." She was holding crystals, visibly shaking. They showed her the recording, and her face grew even more fearful. "You saw her," she whispered. "Did she say anything to you?" "Yeah," my friend replied, "but we couldn't understand it." The woman's voice trembled as she explained, "It's Latin. It says, 'Signum tuum in aeternum manabit.' Your mark will remain for eternity." She looked at me with pity and fear. "You've been cursed. That bridge, it's marked with an ancient evil. There's no easy way to undo this." We left the shop shaken. My friends kept trying to reassure me, saying it was just a scare tactic or maybe some elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew something had changed. That night when I got home, I felt a weight in the air, like the walls of my room were pressing in on me. I tried to sleep, but my dreams were horrific. In one, I was back at the bridge. The old lady was standing there, her face twisted into a grotesque smile, and she held out her hand. In it was a crying baby, wrapped in bloody cloth. "Take it," she whispered. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then she started laughing, and her laugh echoed until it felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. I woke up drenched in sweat, my ears ringing. That's when I saw it. On my arm, just below my wrist, was a faint black mark. At first I thought it was dirt or a bruise, but it wouldn't rub off. It looked like an ancient symbol, one I'd never seen before. Panicked, I called my friends. "Do you have any marks? Anything weird show up after last night?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No," one of them replied. "Why? Did something happen?" When I told them about the mark, they all fell silent. Then one of them, the skeptic, said, "Dude, it's probably nothing. You're freaking yourself out." But I could hear the unease in his voice. Over the next few days, things got worse. Electronics in my house started acting up. Lights flickered, TVs turned on and off by themselves, and my phone would randomly play that woman's laugh, even when it wasn't connected to the internet. Then, the nightmares escalated. In one, I was back at the bridge, except now my friends were there too. They were standing on the edge, crying for help, as shadowy hands dragged them into the water below. The old lady watched from the side, whispering, "It's your fault. You brought them here." One by one, my friends started avoiding me. They wouldn't return my calls or texts. One even moved out of town without saying goodbye. I didn't blame them. I could feel it too. Whatever this curse was, it was growing stronger. I went back to Arcane Rituals, desperate for answers. The woman who had screamed at me before refused to let me in, but she slipped me a note through the door. It read, "The mark binds you to her. It's a tether. You must sever it before it consumes you. Return to where it began." I knew what she meant, but the thought of going back to that bridge made my blood run cold. Still, I couldn't live like this. I packed a bag with some supplies and headed out, alone. The drive felt endless. When I finally reached the bridge, the air was suffocating. The moment I stepped out of the car, I heard it. The baby crying, the woman screaming, and that laugh. Louder now. Closer. I stood in the center of the bridge and shouted, "What do you want from me?" My voice echoed, but there was no answer. Instead, the shadows around me started to move. The old lady appeared, her face more monstrous than before, her eyes glowing red. "You trespassed where you shouldn't have," she hissed. "You mocked the pain that lives here." "I didn't mean to," I stammered. "Tell me how to end this." She smiled, showing jagged, blackened teeth. "You can't," she whispered, "but you can take my place." Before I could ask what she meant, the shadows lunged at me, I screamed, fighting them off, but they were everywhere, suffocating me. The last thing I saw was her face, inches from mine, as she said, "Welcome to eternity." Working the swing shift at a large grocery store in Ohio had its quirks. By the time my shift ended at 2 a.m., the world felt empty, quiet, and a little eerie. That night, my friends convinced me to grab a late-night bite at the only place open at that hour, Denny's. As we slid into the cracked leather booth under the harsh fluorescent lights, I ordered my usual, a burger, fries, and a Coke. My friends, ever the gossip mongers, started dissecting the drama of our co-workers. Lauren was ranting about how one cashier, Caitlin, never pulled her weight, and Kevin chimed in with a tale of a manager's suspiciously long smoke breaks. Somewhere between laughing at their stories and dunking my fries in ketchup, the conversation shifted. Lauren lowered her voice and said, "Have you guys ever heard of Old Ridge Cemetery?" We froze, unsure where this was going. "I swear it's haunted," she continued. "It's been abandoned for decades. Some people say weird stuff happens there late at night, like voices, shadows, you name it." "Sounds like a bunch of urban legend nonsense," Kevin scoffed. Lauren leaned closer, her tone conspiratorial. "Caitlin swears she heard a kid crying there once. No one goes near it anymore, except maybe idiots like us." She grinned mischievously. Kevin's eyes lit up with that dangerous glint of someone who's too curious for their own good. "Let's go check it out." I laughed, thinking he was joking. But within minutes, we were piled into Kevin's beat-up car, burgers barely finished, speeding down an empty highway toward the cemetery. The air grew colder as we approached the outskirts of town. Kevin finally pulled up to a rusted gate, barely hanging on its hinges. Beyond it lay Old Ridge Cemetery, overgrown and shrouded in mist. The moon cast an eerie glow over the toppled gravestones and skeletal trees. "Let's not go in," I said, suddenly regretting every life choice that had brought me here. But Kevin was already out of the car, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Lauren followed, clutching her phone like it was some kind of talisman. Against my better judgment, I trailed after them. The cemetery was silent, save for the crunch of leaves underfoot. Shadows seemed to shift and stretch with every step, as if the graveyard itself was alive. We passed crumbling headstones, their inscriptions too weathered to read. "Over here," Kevin called, pointing to a small stone building at the center of the cemetery. It was a mausoleum, its iron door slightly ajar. "Don't," I whispered, but Kevin was already pushing the door open. Inside, the air was thick and damp. The faint smell of decay lingered. A single coffin sat in the center, its lid askew. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. But then we heard it, a faint whisper, so soft it could have been the wind. "Did you hear that?" Lauren asked, her voice barely audible. We stood frozen, listening. The whisper came again, clearer this time. It sounded like a child's voice, singing an old nursery rhyme. "Ring around the rosy." My heart stopped. The voice grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." Lauren screamed as the coffin lid slammed shut on its own. Kevin dropped his flashlight, plunging us into near-total darkness. "We have to go," I shouted, grabbing Lauren's arm. But as we turned to run, the mausoleum door creaked shut with a deafening clang. The whispers turned to laughter, high-pitched, chilling, and inhuman. Shadows danced on the walls and the air grew icy. Kevin fumbled with the door, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked." I glanced back at the coffin. The lid was now fully open, but it was empty. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl. A figure began to emerge from the darkness, gaunt, skeletal, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly red. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in seconds. We screamed, pounding on the door, begging for it to open. Just as the figure reached us, the door flew open, and we tumbled out into the cemetery. The mist had thickened, obscuring everything. We ran blindly. "We have to keep running," I yelled, grabbing Kevin's arm. My legs felt heavy as we stumbled through the thick mist that seemed to swallow the whole cemetery. The laughter followed us, echoing from everywhere. It wasn't human. It was sharp, cold, and full of malice. "Where's the gate?" Lauren shouted, spinning around in panic. "It should be here," Kevin said, But no matter which way we turned, the graveyard stretched on endlessly, the gravestones standing like silent watchers in the fog. Behind us, the growling started again. I turned and froze. The figure was back, its hollow, glowing red eyes locked on us. It moved slowly this time, its bony fingers stretching out toward us as if savoring our fear. "Don't stop, keep going," I screamed, grabbing Lauren's hand and pulling her forward. The ground suddenly gave way beneath our feet. It was no longer solid, it was wet, cold, and thick like quicksand. I looked down and gasped as skeletal hands began clawing out of the muck, grabbing at our ankles. "They're pulling me under!" Lauren screamed, kicking her legs wildly. Kevin was ahead, grabbing onto a gravestone to pull himself out. "Over here, grab the stone," he shouted. I dragged myself out and turned to help Lauren, but her legs were sinking fast. I grabbed her arms and pulled as hard as I could. "Hold on, I've got you." But then the shadowy figure appeared behind her. Its voice came out in a hollow, echoing tone. "She belongs to me now." "No!" I shouted, pulling even harder. Lauren's terrified eyes met mine. Black tendrils of shadow wrapped around her legs, dragging her deeper. "Don't let go," she cried, her voice breaking. "I won't," I yelled back. But the figure raised its hand and the tendrils tightened, yanking her down. Her fingers slipped out of mine and she disappeared into the ground with a scream. The mist cleared in an instant. The cemetery was silent again. The laughter had stopped. I dropped to my knees, clawing at the earth where Lauren had been. It was solid now, like nothing had happened. "She's gone," Kevin whispered, his voice trembling. "No." I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. "She's not gone. We can still save her." Before Kevin could respond, we heard it, a soft voice drifting through the air. "Help me." It was Lauren. I stood up, my heart pounding. "She's alive. She's still here." Kevin nodded. "Then we're going to get her back." The laughter returned, quieter now, almost like it was mocking us, and in the distance the mausoleum door creaked open again. Kevin and I stared at the open mausoleum door, dread sinking into my chest like ice. The fog shifted, curling toward it as if it were alive, pulling us in. Lauren's faint voice echoed again. "Help me." I swallowed hard, my fists clenched. "She's in there. We have to go." "Are you serious?" Kevin said, his face pale. "That thing, whatever it is, it's waiting for us." "She's still alive, Kevin," I snapped. "We can't leave her." He hesitated, looking at the dark entrance. Then, with a shaky breath, he nodded. "All right, but if we're going in, we need to be smart. No splitting up, no stopping." We approached the mausoleum cautiously, the air colder with every step. The laughter returned, soft but constant, like it was watching us. The doorway yawned open, pitch black inside. Kevin pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The weak beam barely cut through the darkness, but it was enough to see the stone steps leading down into what felt like a void. "Lauren," I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. No answer, just the sound of our footsteps and the distant drip of water. The deeper we went, the tighter the air felt, like something was pressing down on us. The whispers started again, low and indistinct at first, but growing louder the farther we went. "They're getting closer," Kevin muttered, his voice shaking. "I don't like this." "Just keep moving," I said, though my legs felt like they might give out any second. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway opened into a vast chamber. Rows of crumbling stone coffins lined the walls, and in the center was an altar covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly, and there, lying on the altar, was Lauren. "She's here!" I shouted, rushing forward, but as I got closer, I stopped. Something wasn't right. Her body was perfectly still, her face pale and too calm, like she was asleep, but her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Kevin grabbed my arm. "Wait, look at her." I froze. Her lips were moving, but the words weren't hers. A deep, guttural voice came out of her mouth, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. Then her head snapped toward us and her eyes glowed faint red. "You should not have come," the voice said, but it wasn't Lauren's. It was the same hollow, echoing tone as the figure from before. Kevin and I stumbled back as the shadows in the room began to writhe and shift, forming into shapes, tall, skeletal figures with glowing red eyes, just like the one from the cemetery. "We're not leaving without her," I shouted, though my voice cracked. Lauren, or whatever had taken her, laughed, a cold, cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "She is already mine, but you can join her." The figures moved toward us, their bony hands outstretched. The shadows on the walls stretched and twisted, blocking the exit. "Run!" Kevin yelled, pulling me back. I hesitated for a moment, looking at Lauren. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second I thought I saw her real self, terrified and pleading. "Help me," she whispered, her voice breaking through the otherworldly chant. "I'll come back for you," I yelled, tears streaming down my face as Kevin dragged me toward the stairs. We ran, the shadows clawing at our heels, the laughter and whispers growing louder. The stairs felt endless, but somehow we burst out of the mausoleum and into the cold night air. The door slammed shut behind us and the mist cleared completely. The cemetery was quiet again, but Lauren's voice still echoed faintly in my mind. "We'll get her back," Kevin said, panting, his face pale. "But next time we're bringing everything we've got." I nodded, my fists clenched. Whatever was in that mausoleum had her, but I wasn't going to let it win. Not without a fight. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and frantic research. Kevin and I scoured every corner of the internet and every dusty book we could find in the town library. What we were dealing with wasn't just a ghost or some haunted mausoleum. It was something ancient, something malevolent that fed on the living. Kevin stumbled upon an old journal in the library's archives. It belonged to a man named Arthur Grayson, a gravekeeper who had worked at the cemetery decades ago. His entries spoke of strange occurrences, unmarked graves, shadows that moved on their own, and a series of disappearances that were never solved. The final entry read, "The mausoleum is a doorway. I can hear them calling to me. They want blood to stay strong. I'll seal the door tonight, but I fear it won't hold forever." The door hadn't held. "This thing, it's a gateway," Kevin said, his face pale as he read aloud. "Whatever's inside, it's tied to that place, and it's not going to stop unless we close it for good." "But how?" I asked, pacing. "We couldn't even get Lauren out, let alone deal with whatever's down there." Kevin turned the page, his finger tracing an ancient ritual described in Grayson's journal. We seal the gateway, just like he tried to do, but we'll make sure it holds." The ritual wasn't simple. It required symbols carved into the earth, offerings of fire and salt, and most importantly, something personal from the one who was taken. Lauren's bracelet, something she never took off, was still in my pocket from when we pulled her out of the muck. It would have to do. That night we returned to the cemetery. The air was heavy and the fog had rolled in thicker than ever. Every step felt wrong, like the ground itself was rejecting us. Kevin carried a bag filled with supplies, candles, salt, and a carving knife. I carried a crowbar, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against something that wasn't fully human. When we reached the mausoleum, the door was already open. It was as if it had been waiting for us. "We go in, do the ritual, and get out," Kevin said, his voice shaking but determined. "Do we have time to grab Lauren?" I asked, gripping the bracelet tightly. Kevin hesitated. "If we see her, maybe. But the priority is sealing the gateway. If we mess this up, we're all dead, or worse." The stairs seemed steeper this time, the darkness heavier. The chamber was exactly as we'd left it, except now the air buzzed with an unnatural energy. The figures were waiting for us, standing silently along the walls. Their glowing red eyes tracked our every move. Lauren was still on the altar, her lips moving in that horrible chant. Her head snapped toward us again as we approached. "You should not have returned," the voice growled, deeper and angrier this time. Ignoring the shadows closing in, Kevin started carving the symbols into the floor around the altar, muttering the words from the journal under his breath. I sprinkled salt in a circle, my hands trembling. Lauren's body jerked violently as if something inside her was fighting back. Her voice broke through the chanting again. "Please, hurry!" I ran to her, gripping her shoulders. "Lauren, stay with me, we're getting you out of here." The shadowy figures lunged. Kevin shouted, "Hold them off!" I swung the crowbar wildly, connecting with nothing but air as the figures swirled around us, their laughter filling the chamber. One of them reached for me, its icy touch freezing my arm. "Almost done!" Kevin yelled, lighting the candles. The room began to shake, the symbols glowing brighter as he completed the final chant. Lauren let out an ear-piercing scream, and the shadows recoiled, retreating toward the walls. Her body convulsed, and then suddenly she went limp. The altar cracked, splitting down the middle, and a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. The shadows were being sucked into the cracks, screaming as they disappeared. "Grab her!" Kevin shouted. I hoisted Lauren into my arms, barely able to carry her as the ground trembled beneath us. The chamber was collapsing, the walls crumbling as the gateway sealed itself. We ran, barely making it up the stairs before the mausoleum door slammed shut behind us. Outside, the air was clear, the mist completely gone. The cemetery was silent, peaceful even. Lauren stirred in my arms, her eyes fluttering open. What happened? She whispered. You're safe, I said, tears streaming down my face. We got you out. Kevin stood beside me, breathing heavily. Let's hope that thing stays sealed for good this time. But as we turned to leave, I noticed something. The bracelet I had placed on the altar to complete the ritual. It was back in my pocket. And in the distance, I thought I heard faint laughter. As we walked away from the cemetery, none of us spoke. Lauren was weak but alive, leaning on me for support. Kevin carried the bag of supplies, his face pale and eyes darting around nervously. We didn't feel victorious, just relieved to have escaped. We reached my car parked just beyond the cemetery gates. The air felt lighter, but something still gnawed at me. The bracelet in my pocket was cold, as if it carried the chill of the mausoleum with it. I wanted to throw it away, but some part of me couldn't let go. Are you okay? I asked Lauren as I helped her into the back seat. She nodded faintly. I think so, but I can't remember much. It's like something was in my head, controlling me. She shivered, hugging herself. Kevin slammed the trunk shut and got into the passenger seat. Let's just get out of here, far away from this place. I started the car and drove, not saying a word. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. Half an hour passed before Lauren spoke again. It's gone, right? That thing? Kevin glanced at me, then back at her. We sealed it. It's over. But the way he said it didn't convince me. As we reached the outskirts of town, I stopped at a gas station to fill up. Kevin stayed in the car, staring out the window, while Lauren rested in the back seat. I stood at the pump, staring at the dim lights of the station, trying to convince myself we were safe. That's when I noticed something in the car's reflection. A shadow in the back seat. Long, thin, and moving unnaturally. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the back seat was empty except for Lauren still asleep. Kevin caught my panicked look. What's wrong? I shook my head. Nothing. Just tired. We continued driving, the unease never leaving me. When I dropped Kevin off at his apartment, he hesitated before getting out. If anything weird happens, call me, okay? I nodded. You too. Lauren stayed at my place that night. She fell asleep almost instantly, but I couldn't. The bracelet sat on my desk, gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I thought about burying it, burning it, anything to get rid of it, but something told me it wouldn't work. Around 3 a.m., I heard Lauren whispering. At first, I thought she was having a bad dream, but when I went to check on her, she was sitting up in bed staring at the wall. Lauren, I asked cautiously. She turned to me, her eyes wide and unblinking, but they weren't her eyes. They glowed faintly red, just like the figure in the mausoleum. You should have left me there, she said in a voice that wasn't hers. I stumbled back, my blood running cold. Lauren, or whatever was inside her, smiled. You think it's over? The room grew icy, and the shadows on the walls began to twist and stretch. The faint sound of laughter echoed in my ears. You didn't seal the doorway, she said. You opened it wider. Before I could react, the lights flickered and went out. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed the room was her silhouette, standing impossibly tall, her red eyes glowing brighter. And then I heard the laughter again, closer this time. The laughter grew louder, surrounding me, suffocating me. I scrambled backward, my hands searching for anything I could use to defend myself. My fingers brushed against the cold surface of the cursed bracelet still sitting on my desk. Lauren, fight it! I yelled, my voice trembling. You're stronger than this. Her silhouette stepped closer, unnaturally tall, her shadow stretching and looming over me. Lauren is gone, the voice said mockingly. You brought her to me. You brought us all a way back. Desperation consumed me. Clutching the bracelet, I felt a strange, pulsing energy radiating from it, angry and alive. It felt like holding a heartbeat in my palm. An idea struck me. reckless, but the only chance I had. If the bracelet was the key to the doorway, maybe I could force it closed. I dashed toward the kitchen, fumbling for matches and lighter fluid. The laughter shifted to furious growls, and I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps following me. "You think fire will save you?" the voice taunted, echoing all around me. I didn't answer. My hands shook as I poured the lighter fluid over the bracelet, soaking the desk beneath it. Lauren, or the thing she had become, appeared in the doorway, her head tilting unnaturally to the side, her red eyes blazing. "You can't stop it," she said, her voice layered with countless others. "You can't undo what's been done." I struck the match and dropped it onto the bracelet. Flames roared to life, consuming the cursed object in seconds. The screams that followed were deafening, inhuman wails of agony that seemed to pierce my very soul. The room shook violently, the walls splintering as the shadows recoiled and dissolved into nothingness. Lauren collapsed to the floor, her body limp and lifeless. I rushed to her, panic gripping me. "Lauren, please!" She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, her real eyes no longer glowing. "What happened?" she whispered weakly. "It's over," I lied, pulling her into my arms. But as the flames died out, leaving only a pile of ash where the bracelet had been, I noticed something that made my heart sink. The faint outline of a symbol burned into the desk, a circle with jagged edges and a single staring eye at its center. Lauren didn't notice. She was too weak, too exhausted. I helped her to her feet, promising her it was all behind us. But deep down I knew the truth. We hadn't closed the doorway. We had only awakened whatever was waiting on the other side.